The Forbidden Question. Senior cartographer Veller of the Galactic Council's Stellar Mapping Division had spent 15 cycles perfecting the art of seeing what others missed. His species, the Narzine, possessed natural pattern recognition abilities that made them exceptional cartographers, but Veller's talents exceeded even those of his peers. The holographic star map suspended before him represented the culmination of his career, a comprehensive mapping of known space, showing territorial boundaries, transit routes, and stellar phenomena across the galaxy. Yet something in the data troubled him. Computer, zoom sector 47 Kappa. Outer quadrant. Veller instructed, his four eyes narrowing as the projection shifted. The hologram expanded to reveal the region where human territory began and where the map abruptly ended. Unlike other boundary regions, which featured gradient zones of influence, disputed territories, or at least basic stellar cartography extending beyond, the human border was marked by a perfectly straight line. Beyond it lay nothing, not even the most basic star charting data, just empty space and warning symbols in the universal language. No entry. Peculiar, Veller muttered, his tendrils twitching with curiosity. He rotated the projection, examining the boundary from multiple angles. The unnaturally precise edge stretched for thousands of light years, creating an artificial horizon in the data. In his 15 cycles of service, he had never questioned it. No one did. Senior cartographer. The council delegation will arrive in 20 minutes for the quarterly briefing, announced his assistant, Thela, from the doorway. Thank you, Veller replied without looking away from the projection. Thela, have you ever wondered why our maps stop at human space? The room fell silent. When Veller turned to face his assistant, her skin had paled to a sickly green. We don't ask about that, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. It's protocol. Whose protocol? Veller pressed. The council's, or the humans'? Thela glanced nervously at the doorway. Please, senior cartographer. The delegation will be here soon. The projection needs to be finalized. She hurried away before he could respond. Veller stared after her, more intrigued than deterred by her reaction. He collapsed the projection with a gesture and prepared the standard briefing materials. But his thoughts remained fixed on that perfect boundary and the empty space beyond. After the delegation departed, Veller remained in the darkened mapping chamber. He accessed the historical archives, searching for exploration records beyond human space. Nothing. He expanded his search parameters, trade routes, scientific expeditions, even smuggler reports. All stopped at the same boundary. It defied logic. Space was vast and continuous. Stars existed beyond human territory, yet no official record acknowledged them. Over the next several days, Veller carefully gathered fragments of information from different databases. He discovered an old report mentioning a scientific vessel that had crossed the boundary 200 cycles ago. The ship's name was redacted, but its registry number remained. When he traced that number through mission logs, he found nothing. The vessel had been officially decommissioned shortly before its mission near human space. He found similar patterns with 7 other vessels of various species. All had officially ended service after approaching human territory. None had returned journeys logged. His research led him to diplomatic archives next. He had to use his senior credentials to access them, which would leave a traceable record, but his curiosity outweighed caution. The diplomatic records revealed something even more puzzling. Species known throughout the galaxy for aggression and territorial expansion. The warrior Dreth Collective, the expansionist Xeri Empire, maintained unusually respectful diplomatic stances toward humans. Formal communications used language reserved for superior powers, despite humans controlling relatively little territory and having joined the galactic community only 3 centuries ago. One night, working late, Veller discovered an encrypted file in the archive. Using a decryption algorithm from his cartography work, he managed to access part of it. The file contained footage of a diplomatic meeting from 120 cycles ago. Supreme Commander Vostok of the Dreth Collective, a being known for conquering 14 systems and subjugating their populations, was speaking with a single human representative. The human wore simple attire compared to the commander's ornate armor. "We acknowledge your requirement," the commander said, head lowered submissively. "The border will remain as established. No Dreth vessel will cross." The human nodded. "We protect everyone by maintaining this arrangement. Your cooperation ensures mutual survival." The recording ended abruptly. Protect? Survival? From what? The questions multiplied in Veller's mind. The next day, Veller noticed 2 security officers watching him as he entered the cartography division. Director Mellon, his superior for all 15 cycles, called him into her private office immediately. "Your access pattern has been flagged," she said without preamble, her usually melodic voice tight with concern. "You've been investigating restricted information." Veller's heart raced. "I was just trying to understand." "There are things we don't ask about," Mellon interrupted, her voice hushed. "The boundary is one of them." "But why? What's out there?" "I've served here for 40 cycles," she said, leaning forward. "I've seen 9 cartographers transferred to distant outposts for asking exactly what you're asking." Veller felt his skin cool. "Transferred?" One asked the human directly. Mellon's 4 eyes darted to the door before continuing. "She disappeared the next day." Disappeared. Officially, she requested reassignment, but her family received no communication afterward. Mellon's eyes held genuine fear. "The Council pretends humans are just another member species, but they're not. They hold power far beyond their territory." "What kind of power?" Mellon shook her head. "I don't know. No one knows. But I've seen Council leaders pale when human ambassadors whisper to them. I've seen trade agreements rewritten overnight when humans expressed disappointment." As Veller left Mellon's office, he noticed a human in the corridor, the first he had seen in the cartography division in years. The human, tall and slender with dark skin and silver-flecked hair, watched him with an unreadable expression. Just a coincidence, Veller told himself. That evening, returning to his quarters, he found an official notification. He had been selected for a prestigious opportunity, immediate transfer to a monitoring station at the galaxy's opposite edge. As he packed his few belongings, his communication panel chimed. An anonymous message appeared. "Some boundaries protect us from what lies beyond. The map ends for a reason." Veller stared at the message for a long time, wondering what terrifying truth lay hidden beyond that perfect, unnatural border, and why only humans dared to face it. A soft chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. When the door slid open, the same human he had seen earlier stood in the corridor. "Senior Cartographer Veller," the human said, voice surprisingly gentle. "My name is Ambassador Ilana Chen. May I come in? We need to talk about the question you've been asking." Veller felt his heart racing. Everything in him screamed danger, yet he stepped aside. "I believe," the human said as the door closed behind her, "that you deserve answers rather than exile. But I must warn you, knowledge has consequences." "I spent my life pursuing knowledge," Veller said, finding courage he didn't know he possessed. Even when others feared it, Ambassador Chen studied him with dark, ancient eyes. "There's a reason the map stops at our border, cartographer. A reason powerful enough that species who would otherwise annihilate us instead bow their heads when we enter a room." She extended a hand, holding a small data crystal. "This contains coordinates to a human vessel departing tomorrow. If you truly want answers, be on it. If you value peaceful ignorance, destroy this crystal and report to your new assignment." "What will I find?" Veller asked, taking the crystal. "The truth," Chen replied simply, "about what lies beyond the map, about why humanity stands guard at the edge of known space, about why some questions aren't asked." After she left, Veller held the crystal to the light, watching it shimmer with stored data. In 15 cycles of service, he had drawn countless maps, charted innumerable stars. But beyond human space lay the one thing he had never mapped, the unknown. By morning, his decision was made. The truth beyond the stars. The human vessel Vigilant cut silently through space, its design unlike anything Viller had encountered in his cartography career. Despite its modest size, something about it suggested immense power held carefully in check. The ship bore no obvious weapons, yet Viller sensed it could outmatch any military vessel in the Council fleet. Captain Rowan Hayes met Viller in what humans called the observation deck, a circular room with a transparent ceiling revealing the stars above. Hayes was tall for a human, with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom, despite their species' brief lifespan. Ambassador Chen said you asked the forbidden question, Hayes said without preamble, about why the galactic maps stop at human space. Veller's tendrils twitched nervously. Is that why I'm here? To be silenced. Hayes smiled, but there was no humor in it. If we wanted to silence you, you'd never have left the station. He gestured toward the stars. You're here because occasionally, very occasionally, we find someone who might help carry the burden. What burden? The burden of knowledge, of guardianship. Hayes turned to a control panel, and the lights dimmed. A holographic display activated, showing familiar galactic maps. Your maps end at our borders because what lies beyond is something your people, most people, are not equipped to face. The display shifted, extending beyond the familiar boundary. Viller leaned forward, his four eyes widening at the stellar cartography that had been hidden from the Council for centuries. 300 years ago by your calendar, humanity ventured into deep space, Hayes continued. We were young, reckless, eager to explore. We pushed beyond the regions that older species had colonized, wondering why such vast areas of the galaxy remained unsettled despite being rich with habitable worlds. The display zoomed toward a star system at the edge of human territory. At first, we found paradise, empty planets perfect for colonization. No competition, no territorial disputes. We couldn't believe our luck. Hayes's voice grew softer. Then we discovered why those worlds remained untouched. The hologram showed a peaceful colony, human structures nestled among alien vegetation. Then darkness descended from above. The darkness moved, shifted, seemed almost to breathe. It wasn't absence of light, but something that devoured light. Where it touched, matter simply ceased to exist. We called them the Void. Not a species, not a civilization, something older. Something that has existed since the early universe. Hayes's eyes reflected the holographic horror. They consume. Stars, planets, living things, all become part of them. And they're drawn to intelligence, to technology, to the electrical patterns of complex thought. Veller's tendrils went limp with shock. How did humanity survive contact? We almost didn't. Hayes gestured, and the display showed human vessels fleeing, colonies abandoned. But we discovered something unique about ourselves, something that makes us different from every other sentient species we've encountered. The display shifted to show human brain scans alongside those of other species. Our neural patterns are disruptive to them. Painful, perhaps, though we can't be sure they experience anything like pain. When humans concentrate in sufficient numbers, we create a barrier the Void won't cross. We don't know why. Perhaps it's our brain chemistry, perhaps something in our evolutionary history. Our scientists have theories, but no certainty. Viller struggled to process this information. So the boundary is where we stand guard. Hayes finished. Every human colony, every human ship near the border, serves a dual purpose. We live our lives, but we're also sentinels, creating a wall of human consciousness that keeps the Void at bay. But why keep this secret? The Council could help. Hayes shook his head. 2 reasons. First, panic. Imagine telling trillions of beings that ancient cosmic horrors lurk just beyond a thin line of human settlements. Civilization would fracture. Second, his voice hardened. Not everyone reacts rationally to existential threats. The display showed historical footage, alien vessels approaching human colonies, weapons charged. Early on, we shared the truth with the Dreth Collective. hoping for alliance. They concluded that sacrificing humanity to the void would protect their own territories. They attempted to push us beyond the boundary, to use us as bait or a buffer. Hayes's face darkened with ancient anger. We stopped them. Decisively. Other species learned from their example. Vela remembered the diplomatic records, powerful species behaving deferentially toward humans. So when humans speak, the galaxy listens, Hayes nodded. Not out of respect for our wisdom or admiration of our culture, but out of fear. Fear of what we know, fear of what we keep at bay. And yes, fear of what we might do if threatened. It's a heavy burden. The ship shuddered slightly, and alerts flashed on nearby consoles. We're approaching the boundary, Hayes said, checking a display. This vessel is specially shielded. You'll be safe. Safe from what? Hayes didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the transparent ceiling. Look up. Beyond the observation dome, space itself seemed to warp. The stars blurred, their light stretching and distorting as if seen through rippling water. Then Veller saw it, a darkness moving against the void of space, visible only by the absence of stars where it passed. They're always testing the boundary, Hayes said quietly, probing for weakness. As Veller watched in horror, the darkness coalesced, forming patterns that hurt his eyes. Geometries that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing, tendrils trembling uncontrollably. This is as close as we dare take you, Hayes said. Any nearer, and they might sense your consciousness. Different from ours, possibly. Appetizing. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the ship. The darkness beyond seemed to pulse, expanding toward them. On a nearby console, red warnings flashed. Breach, shouted a crew member from an adjacent room. Section 7. Hayes's expression hardened. They've never reached this far before. He pressed a communicator on his wrist. All humans to breach points. Full consciousness protocols. He turned to Viller. Stay here. Do not leave this room, no matter what you see or hear. Through the observation dome, Viller watched as the darkness extended tendrils toward the ship. Where they touched the hull, the metal seemed to ripple and distort. Sounds of running footsteps echoed through the corridors as crew members rushed to their stations. Captain Hayes sprinted away, leaving Veller alone in the observation deck. Minutes passed like hours as the Narzine cartographer watched the incomprehensible entity surrounding them. The ship's lights flickered, then stabilized. Through the internal communication system, Veller heard voices, human voices, chanting in unison. The sound grew louder, more synchronized, almost hypnotic. As the chanting intensified, the darkness outside seemed to recoil, its tendrils withdrawing from the hull. On a nearby monitor, Veller could see feed from different sections of the ship. Humans stood in circles, hands linked, eyes closed in deep concentration. Their faces showed strain, sweat beading on foreheads, but their voices remained steady. The darkness pulsed once more, angry, frustrated, then retreated, sliding back into the void between stars. The ship's alarms silenced one by one. When Hayes returned, his face was ashen with exhaustion. Now you've seen, he said quietly. This was a minor incursion. They become bolder each cycle. Veller's voice trembled. What did you do? How did you repel them? Concentrated human consciousness, Hayes explained, collapsing into a chair. Our minds, working in unison, create patterns they cannot tolerate, like sonic weapons that disrupt certain frequencies. He rubbed his temples. Effective, but draining. And you do this, constantly. At the boundary. Hayes nodded. Thousands of human outposts, millions of humans, taking shifts at the edge of known space, always vigilant, always watching. He looked up at Veller. This is why we keep to ourselves, why we rarely venture into council space in large numbers. Too many of us away from the boundary creates weak points. Veller moved closer to the observation dome, studying the now empty space beyond. Why show me this? Why not transfer me like the others who asked questions? Because the burden grows heavier, Hayes said simply. 3 centuries of standing guard, with no end in sight. We need the Council to understand. Eventually, not to fear us, but to know why we do what we do. He stood, approaching Veller, but gradually, carefully, to the right people. And I'm the right person? Velar asked incredulously. You asked questions out of genuine curiosity, not fear or political advantage. You sought understanding, not power. Hayes gestured to the stars. Cartographers map reality as it is, not as they wish it to be. We need that honesty. As the Vigilant turned back toward Council space, Veller watched the boundary recede. His mind raced with implications, with the terrible burden humanity had shouldered without recognition or thanks. For 3 centuries, they had stood as silent guardians against horrors the rest of the galaxy couldn't comprehend. What happens now? Veller asked as they approached the border. You return to the Council with a partial truth, Hayes replied. That humans maintain the boundary for scientific research purposes, studying spatial anomalies too dangerous for general access. Not a lie, just incomplete. He handed Veller a data crystal. This contains sanitized reports, enough to satisfy curiosity without revealing the full threat. And what of the real knowledge? About the void? Hayes studied him carefully. That depends on you. Watch how the Council reacts to the partial truth. Identify others who might bear the burden of knowing. Help us build a foundation for eventual disclosure. You're asking me to be your agent, Veller realized. No, Hayes corrected. I'm asking you to be a bridge. Between what is and what must someday be. Between humanity and the galaxy we protect. 2 weeks later, Veller stood before the Cartography Council, presenting his report on human territorial boundaries. The sanitized explanation satisfied most questions. When Director Mellon asked about his unexpected return from reassignment, he cited special dispensation for scientific exchange. The human observer in the back of the chamber, Ambassador Chen, gave him an almost imperceptible nod. That night, alone in his quarters, Veller created a new map, one he stored on an encrypted personal device. On it, he began charting what lay beyond human space, building from the limited data Hayes had shared. He marked the locations of human outposts, the patterns of their deployments, the strategic positions they maintained. It wasn't the full truth. That burden remained too heavy for most to bear. But it was a beginning, a first step toward understanding why the galactic map stopped at human space and why humanity stood silent guard at the edge of civilization, asking for nothing in return but the right to maintain their lonely vigil. As he worked, Veller whispered a promise to the stars. You will not stand alone forever. Somewhere beyond the boundary, in the darkness between stars, ancient hungers stirred. And on countless human outposts along the edge of known space, sentinels prepared for another day of standing guard against the void.